Welcome to another episode of Two Drink Maximum, the show over two drinks and nothing more. I'm your host, Shane.
I'm your other host, Chase. It's a great day. It's a wonderful day today.
It is. It's a warm day outside, but that's not going to slow us down from having a great guest on the show with a great drink. So We are very excited to welcome Benjamin Holcomb on the show. Benjamin is the publisher and editor of the World's Greatest Toy Digest. He is also the author of the Mego 8-inch Superheroes World's Greatest Toys book. We are so excited to have him. Benjamin, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we are excited to have you. So as we generally try to start on the show, our first question is always, what are we drinking tonight? And I do want to be clear, we're breaking the format of the show a little bit. We're all kind of drinking something a little bit slightly different. But walk us through what you're drinking, and then we'll kind of explain why we're playing catch up with you for sure.
And I know that most of the time you guys are doing interesting alcoholic beverages with interesting people. I felt a little guilty suggesting this one. But then I realized you did have another guest who did tea. You guys did chai tea on an earlier episode. So I don't feel so bad bringing coffee to the table. So I'm going to be doing some wonderful espresso shots and hot coffee. And you guys are going to do some drip, I believe.
Yeah, some drip coffee. So
do you have some drip coffee?
The fact that you're calling it drip coffee and you're doing espresso says to me that you have a very kind of stylized coffee that you like to drink. So walk us through your morning coffee. Like, what is your kind of preferred? Like, you have expensive machinery that you use in your house. So walk us through your usual morning coffee.
Yeah, it is a ritual. You know, it really is. It's something I look forward to the moment I open my eyes. Like, oh God, yes, it's coffee time. I got myself a nice high-end espresso machine, and it's loud and it's beautiful and it pulls really good shots, and I love it. And I've been using it for about 5 years, and it was a question of finding the right beans and then dialing in every element, because there's so many knobs and levers and controls you can have on a good espresso machine for what the grind is and how hot it is and how fast it's pulling and the quantity that's pulling.
Mm-hmm.
So I used that for about 5 years. But then about a year ago, my brother sent me this little plastic AeroPress. It's like a cheap, kind of a French press deal, but it's really good for travel. And I have learned that it makes some of the most superior coffee in the world, because if you have good beans and you grind them fresh and you use this thing, with an espresso machine, you're limited because it has a portafilter that holds the grinds. There's only so much you can put in there. But with the AeroPress, it's just a big cylinder. You can put as much as you want in there, as long as you're able to physically press the water down through. So you can just make this incredibly robust and rich, flavorful cup of coffee that you can't really do. I mean, the French press could potentially do that as well, but the AeroPress just is amazing to me. So I use it only for travel and for special occasions. So tonight I'm having an AeroPress coffee.
Nice. Well, it looks delicious. So we'll have to get the link to the product and your specific recipe, so that listeners at home want to follow along. They'll be able to have the Benjamin Holcomb cup of coffee.
It's cheap and it's amazing. You just got to find the right creamer that you like, find the right bean that you like, and you're good to go.
But have you mastered your latte art, I guess?
I don't do a lot of frothing. I don't actually like the frothing on top. I just I'm more of a latte kind of person, like sort of make an Americano, but then with enough creamer that it's more like a latte. It's an Americate, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, we've invented something new, Americate. I think I drink those as well.
I use oat milk now, and it's great.
There you go. I'm telling you, we'll just patent it as the Holcomb. That'll be the name of the drink. I like it.
There you go.
People copyright the show, yeah.
But the thing I'm excited about too, guys, is that I only can drink coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife and I joke about we can't wait to get to that age. And that age is when you're like the old person at Bill Knapp's who can go and drink coffee after dinner at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and then still go home and go to bed. That is not me. Somewhere around 35, that ended. And I'm sure you guys are the same way, where it's like, you can't just keep doing caffeine at night. It really doesn't work.
I imagine by the end of the show, we'll be talking a lot faster than we normally are.
I'm just excited. I want to know if I can sleep tonight. That's what I'm excited about. Like, how bad's it going to be after we talk? We'll see how it goes, because this is later than I normally have coffee.
Yeah, well, good.
Well, hopefully our conversation will not bore you to sleep. But we wanted to start asking about, you have a very unique passion here and a unique expertise. We wanted to know, how did you first get into collectibles and toys, and where did this passion arrive from you?
This is a lifelong pursuit. I really put a lot of credit into the toy company Mego that has in recent years sort of resurrected, but was gone for a long time. They were around throughout the 70s. They were one of the biggest toy companies in the world, and they had all these amazing licenses. I mean, if you're of a certain age in Gen X, you had a Mego toy because they had all the major licenses from Star Trek and the superheroes and TV shows like Happy Days and The Love Boat. And they just had a lot of licenses, and they were fantastic toys, and they had a huge impact on me as a kid, and in particular the packaging. I think the packaging, because it was just really bright colors and really clean, elegant design, it had an impact on me at a young age, and I feel like it's what drove me toward being a designer in life and becoming a graphic designer, because I just was super mindful of what the decisions that they were making.
What really drew you to it? Like, in the specifics, was it the bright colors, like all that cool stuff? Did it just entertain your childlike wonder seeing those boxes on the shelves?
Yeah, I think it was the bright colors, the simple, clean graphic design. When I was a kid, the superheroes that I loved, the Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, they were like 8-inch action figures. They had removable cloth costumes, very much like Barbie or G.I. Joe, but in a smaller scale. They were 8 inches tall, not 12 inches tall. And they came in boxes, and they looked like coffins basically, but they were very colorful coffins. And as a kid, I used to, put my action figures to bed, like back in their coffin at the end of the day, and like they would sleep in their boxes. And so the boxes and the packaging actually became sort of part of the play value for me. And I remember when they stopped making boxes and switched to blister cards, which is the thick cardboard with a piece of plastic window to keep kids from digging in and checking out the toy. I vividly remember being a kid and seeing them on the shelf and going, "What? What is this? These are terrible." I mean, they were great because they protected the toy and they give you a great view of it, but it was startling to me because I was so obsessed with that particular box shape. I remember Christmas 1976. I was 6 years old, and we had a tradition in our family where you could open up one present on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of families have that tradition, I guess, and it was a big one for us. And my mother, knowing my obsession, tried to throw me off the scent. And so she stacked 3 window boxes. And luckily I have a photo, so I even know which ones it was, but she tried to stack them up and wrap them as one toy. And the aspect ratio was not lost on me, even if you multiply it. So I went right for that. I'm like, those are my Megos. So Christmas Eve, I got my loot. I was a happy boy.
What was now you got those 3 for Christmas, but what was the first Mego that you got that was like, oh, I love these, and maybe it dawned on you at that exact moment too, I want to collect these?
Yeah, I think I never thought of myself as a collector as a kid. That's sort of a later adult concept. And I remember at being 12 and 13 years old, which now is funny because kids would never be into action figures at that age. But it was a different time back then. I remember going to stores like, where are they? What? I can't find them. And it took a couple of years before the aftermarket toys started coming out and becoming available. And you had to wait until the 90s for things like Toy Shop Magazine, which was a great newspaper publication that toy collectors could subscribe to, and they'd be filled with ads from old doll collectors. And I don't know what the correct term is. I know that it's politically incorrect to say hoarders, but I don't know what the correct term is for that. But the people who have a lot of stuff that they don't need, and then they end up eventually selling it or passing on, and someone else sells their stuff. I mean, that's a big thing in our culture. Like, we had a hoarding culture, and God bless them, man. Those old doll ladies who just couldn't help but buy every Joker and Catwoman doll they found. They're the reason we have an aftermarket. So I love them.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? Those people were absolutely saviors when it came to like trying to finish collections or, kind of build your,
Maybe they were all just ahead of the game. They just didn't know it yet.
Yeah. They were.
It's well, and so speaking of, I mean, as you got a little bit older, I mean, as you kind of mentioned, I mean, you are a graphic designer, you're a photographer. When did those skills kind of start to emerge for you, or at least when did you start to discover I like doing this type of work and I'm very good at this type of work? When did that kind of become obvious for you?
Again, throughout childhood, I was doing creative things and drawing all my Kiss albums and trying to draw Gene Simmons and do master all the makeup drawings. And honestly, into high school, I just started doing a lot of illustrations, started trying to do comic books. Then Frank Miller changed the world in 1986 when he came out, Dark Knight Returns, and
Yeah, oh yeah.
and it was just like, this is for me. I mean, this everything just sort of came together. We had a really great local comic shop, and I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we had Dave's Comics was just a phenomenal toy store. I love Dave. I miss Dave. I spent a lot of hours at that shop. But that 86 was just such a magical time. And 86 went right into 89, really, when you've got the Tim Burton Batman. And it was just everything came to the head. And that's right when I was in college. I went to art school at the University of Michigan. So
Nice.
everything just sort of like my creative interests and my nerd pursuits, like my hobbies, like my avocation became my vocation.
And you use those abilities, and we came together in this incredible, giant Mego 8-inch Superheroes World's Greatest Toys book. You designed every page in here?
Yes.
How did you even begin that process?
Oh, yeah, it was a 4-year process making that book. It was a lot of work.
Wow.
It started with a mutual friend of ours. It started with Rob Chatlin, who is just an amazing human being. He edited that book, actually. I don't know if you saw his name in there, but Rob edited it and has edited almost everything I've ever done, actually, because we've been friends for a very long time as fellow collectors. It started, we were driving to Pomona, and we were trying to get some antique stores, I think, that were in Pomona. And I was just telling him, I think I've realized that there are 6 different variations of packaging for Amigo Batman. And Rob's response, because you guys know Rob is a very cut to the chase kind of guy. He's very dry, and he's just like, you should do a book.
Sounds like him.
Yeah, that's Rob. And I said, yeah, I guess I could do a book. I mean, there were other people who were also collectors who had talked about doing a Mego book. It's something that other people had said they were going to do, and it just wasn't coming to pass. And at first it was wouldn't that be cool? And then I thought about it, and it was like your question a moment ago. It's this convergence of my skills and my interests. Like, I'm thinking, hang on, I do page layout and graphic design and illustration. I know how to use the Adobe Suite. And I love these toys, and no one else is doing this book, so maybe I should do this book. So I started working on it, started leaning on people online and asking for help and getting photos from people and the insights and putting together a whole packaging chronology, and basically just started writing the book without really a clear vision. And at some point reached out and found a publisher, and the book came out in 2007 after 4 years of work.
It is a very, very expansive book. It's almost an encyclopedia about these things. It's very amazing, all the information and photos and just everything you condensed into those pages is very, very impressive. So amazing work there.
Thank you. Can I tell you, though, what I've realized about this book, and now it's been a lot of years, and I've gotten a lot of wonderful compliments about the book. I mean, a lot of people have said very dramatic things. A lot of people refer to it as the Mego Bible. It's like, well, I don't know if you'd use that word, but they're very complimentary about this. But I've come to realize a few years ago, I realized the book is only half the story. It's not really how that company or any toy company in the 1970s worked. It was a dual universe. You had everybody in New York, which was all the big toy companies and the ones that we know, and some that weren't even in New York. But I mean, there was the Toy Center was in New York. All the toy fairs happened in New York, but all the manufacturing happened in Hong Kong. And a lot of the decisions and a lot of the work and a lot of the sculpting and a lot of the graphic design and the engineering was not done here. And the book that I did, I reached out to industry insiders, but it was Americans. It was people who I was able to track down through various sources, and people who worked in New York for Mego. And it never touched on this critical other side of the process, which is how are these toys actually made? Mm-hmm. And with the internet, with technology, and with LinkedIn and these other resources, I was able to go and find some of these people across the world.
Wow.
And so now I have found Selwyn Marr. He was the president of the company called Lion Rock in Hong Kong, and they were the manufacturing arm for Mego. They did all the toys. Everything came out of that factory.
Yeah, that's just as important as selling them or kind of getting them on shelves. Absolutely.
Sounds like we got another book on the way.
And they're interesting people with really interesting stories. I mean, the toy industry in the 70s, it was depraved. There are a lot of, I don't know how to put it politely.
That's an unexpected description of the toy industry.
Yeah.
It's a weird, stark contrast. You've got objects that are for children made by really seedy adults doing really questionable things and a lot of drugs. When I was researching the book and interviewing people, a lot of them wanted to tell me and sort of get this stuff off their chest. Like, you got to hear about this. And when I was doing the book, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to hear this stuff, because it's not at all. The book is a love letter to the toys. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about, I'll give you an example. And this I had corroborated by multiple people. There was a thing with toy companies and toy buyers in the 70s. And at least at Mego, I corroborated this with multiple people that worked there. It was lobster, steak, and a hamburger. So you would take a buyer, a big retail buyer from, say, Toys R Us or Kmart, you take them out to dinner during Toy Fair, ostensibly to socialize, but you're trying to get them to write that big order for 100,000 dozen Fonzie dolls. You're trying to get that big order.
Yeah. Everybody needs those Fonzie dolls.
Everybody needs the thumbs that pop up in there. It's important. And so this jargon of lobster, steak, or hamburger was apparently a known thing to these people. And it was a code to let the toy people know type of prostitute they expected to be in their hotel room after dinner.
Whoa.
So lobster was a $300 a night prostitute.
Uh-huh.
Steak was, a less expensive person on the street, and a hamburger was a $5 event.
So never meet your heroes.
Outrageous. never meet your heroes. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. It's wild stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you could make the Wolf of Mego Street, like you could make something like
right.
The Wolf of Toy Town. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so I want to back up a little bit, right? So we've mentioned Megos a lot, right? Mego toys, Mego dolls. I think if you didn't grow up in the 70s, you are still familiar with Mego dolls, right? Or Mego toys, and a quick Google will kind of show you what we're talking about. But, like the question, so Mego started in the 50s, and then they didn't really kind of hit the stratosphere until the 70s when they really started with these superhero toys, right, with Marvel and DC. But what is it that made Mego so special, right? In terms of they were, as soon as they hit those Marvel DCs, they were just wildly popular. What do you surmise made them so special at the time and still now?
I think it's going to come back to the engineering and the manufacturing side. They had some of the most incredible people in Hong Kong doing this stuff, real experts in their respective fields. And what they were able to do was take an idea from the American side, and they were able to engineer and produce and manufacture and distribute a toy for very little money. What made Mego special is that you could get a Superman doll for $1.97. And that was a big deal. I mean, that's, if you adjust for inflation, that's a lot more today. But even back in the 70s, a buck and a half, $2, parents could actually afford to do that and get you a really special, really well-made toy, an action figure, which was a big deal back in the early 70s. So I think part of it is choosing the right licenses, right? And so that's a double-edged sword. You got Marty Abrams, who was the president of the company, who kind of helped propel them into the stratosphere by picking some of the right licenses, the right intellectual property, picking the superheroes and picking Happy Days and the Wizard of Oz and Planet of the Apes. I mean, they did the Planet of the Apes action figures that if you were in the 70s, you probably had one of those. But the double-edged sword is that he also didn't get Star Wars.
Right.
And so you can live and die by those decisions that you make. And I actually wrote a lot about that in one of the Star Wars issues, because there's been a lot of question about why didn't Mego make Star Wars toys? They were inarguably the number one with a bullet company at the time. In 77, when Star Wars came out, they kind of ruled the action figure universe. The first action figure, as everybody knows, was G.I. Joe, and he was 12 inches tall. Mego came along and they said, what if we took G.I. Joe but made him only 8 inches tall so we could save money, and we'll call him Action Jackson? So Star Wars said, Kenner looked at Star Wars and said, well, what if we did 8 inch, but then we actually made them really small so we can make the vehicles as well? It's kind of the natural progression of things. Costs go up. You're trying to look at how you can get these things made.
Yeah, things go smaller and smaller, but there was just something about the Mego dolls that they just felt like the right size, right? And the fact that they had removable costumes, they're just instantly memorable dolls. They have this kind of very unique kind of soft features, right? That are they're just so cool. And it doesn't surprise me that especially when the superheroes kind of started to take off, that they were just kind of instantly a success for Mego. That makes perfect sense to me. And obviously you kind of talked about licensing, right? That they had the DC, they had the Marvel, but they had some other pretty wild, licenses. When Chase and I were looking through, when we were reading the book, like one of the dolls that just killed us was like the Kiss dolls, and like those like dressed for business. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kiss in business attire. What?
Well, to be fair, that was the special edition book was from Figures Toy Company, which is a separate modern day toy company. They did reissues of Kiss dolls. Mego never did Dress to Kill. Mego never did Love Gun. Mego never did any. Well, actually, Love Gun I think is what they ended up doing. Mego only made one set of costumes on 12-inch figures. But now other companies have come along and done new Mego. Mego style is kind of is jargon in the collector industry. It just means an action figure that has removable clothing. Typically 8 inches, but not even necessarily. It just has to have that removable clothing. So those are funny, but those were actually figures, to be fair.
Forgive me.
Gotcha.
We don't want to offend any collectors.
No.
We don't need that camp after us. We just want them to listen and learn some knowledge and check out your book whenever they get a chance. So what, in your opinion...
I just can't have Rob Chatelain thinking that I think that Mego made Dress to Kill Kiss figures. I would have lost my mind if I had seen that in 1975.
Don't worry. But as time progresses, obviously a lot of these things become very, very valuable. Why do you think that value has gone up? Is it just scarcity? Is it the uniqueness? Or is it like nostalgia? Or people just remember these things and, once the market starts growing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. I make a distinction between the words rarity and scarcity. They're synonymous and they are used interchangeably by most people. But I make a very clear distinction between rarity and scarcity, and that it's semantics. But for me, rarity it speaks to that there was very few of them made in the first place. That's rarity. If they didn't make that many, it's rare. Scarce, I consider more of a time thing. It's no matter how many they made, it's hard to find now. That's scarce.
I was saying, why do you think the value has continued to rise over the years? Why do people gravitate to these so much?
Yeah, it's got to be the nostalgia, right? It's got to be going back and trying to recapture the youth, the stuff that you had when you were a kid. That answer works within reason, but then you get to certain pieces that, to me, defy logic and explanation. There's a Mego made a Green Goblin 8-inch action figure, a Spider-Man villain, and he was only ever released on one particular blister card. Came in boxes, but there's only one card for him, and it's very hard to find. It didn't sell well when it came out. It's something that I would consider both rare and scarce. They didn't make a lot of them, and they're really hard to find now. But the last one that sold at auction sold for $76,600.
Goodness.
Yeah, and even for me as a hardcore collector nerd, I love it. Value is cool. Toys are. that's too much. If you're spending $76,000 on an action figure, that just kind of hurts my soul.
Yeah, it feels like perhaps there's some better ways to spend that money for $76,000. But I mean,
and maybe not. I mean, if you've got the money, right? That's a beautiful thing. Like if you can, God bless you. That's great. It's hard for me to process, but that doesn't mean it's not easy for someone else to process.
Yeah, perhaps Jeff Bezos has that kind of money to throw around on a piece of his nostalgia, but for the rest of us, it's a little bit, yeah. But for me, if anybody listening is shocked by that number, I mean, Mego dolls are, not only were they incredibly cool toys back in the day, but one of the reasons why they are so popular and they're still in the conversation now when it comes to collectibles is because they are so valuable, right? So if you have some of those old Mego dolls, especially if you still have them like on the blister card or in the packaging, you probably want to get them checked out by somebody who kind of knows what they're talking about. Obviously, cards or values kind of come and go with inflation and all sorts of things and wane. But what are some of the average prices that you're seeing some of these Mego dolls that are in excellent condition? I mean, are you easily talking 5 figures for some of the more rare ones, or for maybe some of the more popular ones if they're in great shape? I mean, what are we looking at on today's market in terms of what some of these Mego dolls are worth?
Yeah, you can get to 4 and 5 figures pretty easily on variants when you have the hardcore collectors who are trying to get every version of every piece ever done. But if you just wanted to collect the characters loose without packaging and find them complete, you're looking at maybe a couple $100 per figure to do. It's not brutal, but it's not cheap either. I mean, it's for all the superheroes that they did, yeah, you're looking at $200 to $500 for them loose. But then as soon as you get into the packaging, then that's where it gets nuts, because they're so much harder to find still in the package, and people are willing to spend a premium when they want to get that piece they didn't have.
Do you know what the most expensive one was that's ever been sold?
Well, I think it's the Goblin. I think, to my knowledge, that 76,600 I think is the record. I know that a rare Australian Wonder Woman also has gone for 5 figures a couple of times. So between $20,000 and $50,000, that's transacted a few times. That wasn't even available in America, so that becomes a really difficult chase figure for people. And Wonder Woman has her own huge fan base, right? So You've got not just toy collectors, not just Mego collectors, but you've got I'm a Wonder Woman freak. I've got to have everything Wonder Woman. So yeah, that's another super, super tough piece. But that's rare. I mean, there are. I mean, Mego is not the nuttiest when it comes to prices, and I think we're going to see them overshadowed really quickly by 80s toys, because that's the next generation, right? So when you're looking at the G.I. Joe stuff and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Star Wars, of course, is always pulling huge numbers. Props from the movies selling for $3.1 million. That's,
Yeah, there's this value there. Yeah, you're right. The packaging is what makes some of those ridiculous numbers, because basically at that point you're looking for a kid that didn't open or play with their toys. And so it's like that's a level of rarity that just doesn't exist in most children. But if you were that one kid that never opened your toys and just got them for Christmas and put them in a closet, you could be looking at some serious cash now.
Absolutely. And that does happen. People pull that stuff out of the closet. There was a fun story a couple of years ago where a guy, he reached out to me and he said, "I've got something I want to show you." And he, back in the 70s, his parents had ordered a single Batman from JCPenney, which was a huge mail order company at the time. I mean, they're still around, but their mail order business was probably as big as their brick and mortar retail. So the parents for Christmas ordered one Batman. And for some mistake at the warehouse or distribution, they sent him a case. So he got 24 Batmans in the counter display box, which the box that they came in is also incredibly valuable. It's thousands of dollars just for that, because it has the graphics of the superheroes on it. So he had this thing, but he didn't have all 24 figures, because over the years, the old man had been handing them out at Halloween and when his friends came over.
Yeah.
So I think the 24 had been knocked down to maybe 6 Batmans or something, but still, like, they were just sitting in the closet in the hallway. And it's like, how is that possible?
That's wild.
Fantastic story. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a two-part question. What, looking back now at the Mego run, what is your favorite collection or kind of, like intellectual property that Mego had? And then follow-up question, what is the weirdest that you're like, who wanted these, or what was Mego thinking when they made this collection?
Happy Days sounds pretty odd for me.
Yeah, I don't think Happy Days did big business for them, but a few seasons in, Fonzie did get very popular. So they sold a lot of Fonzie dolls. The other, Ralph Malph, probably not so many of those. Probably not so many Potsies getting sold. I mean, for me, good comeback, Ralph.
Shots fired at Potsy, man. Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
All apologies to Nick at Night.
Sorry. What was his name? Anson something?
Yeah.
Yeah, superheroes is it. I am a dyed-in-the-wool spandex and cape nerd. Like, I've just always been drawn to that stuff. I mean, when the Nicholas Hammond Spider-Man show came out in, what was it, 78, just to see my heroes in live action, it was mind-blowing. I mean, I lived for that stuff. So I got to go with that. There are other lines that people are a little nuttier for. Planet of the Apes is a really popular line. Another thing they did that people love is Micronauts. Micronauts was a really cool line that they did. They brought the concept over from a Japanese toy company called Takara. And they had a line of toys called Micro Man, and it was just little miniature plastic and die-cast figures. And it had its own universe, and Marvel Comics did a really sort of like fan favorite and critically well-received run of comics about Micronauts. Like, if you're a comic nerd and you probably know about the Micronauts run with Michael Golden. It was a very, very popular line. It never really grabbed me. It wasn't kind of my jam, but I understand why people love it. It was a fantastic line. That's part of the challenge, right? It's we talked about that double-edged sword. You've got to find that next big thing. If you're a toy company, you're only as good as your last big hit. And Toy Fair comes around every February in the 70s. See, if you're not buying up everything you can, what happens is you miss Star Wars.
What would you like to see be the next big thing in toys? If they walked in and were like, "Hey, man, tell us what should be next."
Oh God, less video games, fewer video games, I should say. I'm just burned out. I have a 9-year-old son, so I'm just a little saddened and burned out by it's all screens, really. I shouldn't just blame video games. It should be social media and our phones and our Netflix and our Zoom and just everything that we do is so screen based. And I just lament that we're losing that kind of independent, free thinking, go out, get dirty, and play with your toys. I would love to see that stuff come back. And I'd love to see higher quality toys. I mean, I'm sure you guys have not wandered through the toy aisle at Target recently, but not to put too fine a point on it, it's garbage. It's these really cheap, thin, blow molded, not even very well sculpted, not very interesting. They're just churning this stuff out. There's 17 versions of Aquaman in 14 different scales, and it's just none of it's interesting. None of it has any real play value. Bernie Loomis, the president of Kenner, is famously known for the word he coined, toyetic. Toyetic is something that has that intrinsic magical property that makes it a good toy. So anything can be toyetic. Like, he looked at Star Wars and said, that's toyetic. There's robots and there's Chewbacca's and there's spaceships. That's toyetic. I'd love to see that come back. I mean, I'm not seeing anything clever or interactive anymore. It's just a lot of really cheap blow molded stuff coming out.
Yeah. Well, luckily for people who are fans of old school toys and who missed that era of playing with high quality toys, your book did an incredible job of just capturing all that, right? I mean, there's so many high resolution photographs. It's thick paper, like it's high quality stock. And you've got so many interviews with all the people who worked on those toys. Like I said, I know the collector side is coming out for you where it's like, I didn't get everybody, right? But it's like, you might not feel comfortable saying it, but we'll say it. It is absolutely kind of the Bible for Mego toys. And so if you are interested in Mego toys, and why wouldn't you be? Because they're awesome. You got to get a copy of this book, which as of the recording, there are still copies you can get on Amazon. It's not, it's a popular book, so it does sell out, but it's just an incredible book. And like, it's so cool that you were able to write it and you get it out there. So thank you. I'm sure for collectors everywhere, man. Thank you. You did the world a service there.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of fun doing it.
It is very cool, but I know what's not cool. What's not cool, Shane?
Not cool is that I'm looking at 3 empty glasses here that we need to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to make some refills, and we'll be right back with Benjamin Holcomb here in just a minute.
Be right back.
Chase, I don't know about you, but it does feel like ever since COVID hit, we spend so much time in our homes, and our homes have kind of become our office, and it's been this kind of weird blend of professional and home. I find that occasionally it is difficult to become creative in the house. Sometimes you got to get out and you got to find a different space to kind of let that creativity fly. And we are excited to share with our listeners that if you are in the LA area, we have the solution for you. We are proudly sponsored by The Muse Rooms, which is a creative co-working space that is here. They have a Hollywood location and they have a Burbank location, 2 convenient locations for you, that is ready to serve all of your creative space needs. If you want to rent space for a day to work on that screenplay, or if you need to rent a conference room for a big meeting that you have with a team that doesn't meet regularly, the Muse Rooms has got you covered. It's a great space. It's a great owner. It's a great vibe too. It's just a really cool, you'll get points with the youngsters. Being cool for renting out.
It's the hip spot to be, indeed.
It definitely is. So give the Muse Rooms a check if you're for all of your creative co-working space needs at the Muse, MUSE rooms.com. And now let's move on to part 2 of the show.
Welcome back from the break. We are here with Benjamin Holcomb, publisher, editor, author of the World's Greatest Toy Digest, which we've gotten a really, really detailed history and apparently a seedy history, as we've just learned in this previous break. We wanted to move away from Mego and talk about the other toy line that most people might recognize, which is the Kenner Star Wars line. You have a series of magazines that you've also published called the World's, I'm going to get the title right.
World's Greatest Toys Digest. Yep.
World's Greatest Toys Digest. Exclusively talking about the Kenner line of Star Wars toys. So could you tell us what brought your interest to the Kenner toy line, or any experiences you had with those growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I had them just like everybody else. It had these toys. I mean, it was pretty ubiquitous. If you're a Gen X and you were a kid when those movies were coming out, you had some toys. What I wanted to take on with these, I did a trilogy of magazines, because you're doing Star Wars, you got to do a trilogy, right? So you got to make sure you got enough content to do all 3.
And just for the record, by the way, the covers are like a triptych, right? They form like one poster, and they're awesome when you put them all together. We'll make sure to tweet out a picture of them so people can see what they look like, but they look incredible when you put them together. They're awesome.
Thank you. It was actually my wife's idea, so I'm going to credit her on that. So she's like, you should put them all together. All right, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
What I wanted to tackle with this, though, is not just Kenner. I think sort of coming off of the learning about the manufacturing side of other toy companies, I sort of became interested in other aspects of the toy industry other than just the toys themselves, but more about the people and the histories and the decisions that were made. So with this trilogy, I decided to attack what I call the early birds of Star Wars merchandising. The average person doesn't maybe realize that very few people on Earth thought Star Wars was going to do well. I mean, they expected it to actually do very badly. And so not a lot of people jumped on it, out of the gate. So in 1977 and before, by my count, there were only 28 companies that signed on and got licensing deals with 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm to do anything related to Star Wars. It was, and for a lot of them, it was a bit of a crapshoot. There were very few people who actually saw the light. So I wanted to kind of take a dive into these companies and figure out who they were and who made these decisions and what led them to make these decisions, and find some vignettes about their successes and failures with it. So that was my goal. And so I want to take on and do right from the Ballantine Books that did the first novelizations, Don Post Studios that made the over-the-head masks. You had Ben Cooper, they made the little Halloween costumes. Remember those like vinyl costumes with the plastic mask with the elastic band that you'd sweat
His face would slowly melt off as he was collecting the candy.
And that elastic band would last 3 houses before it snapped every time. Bing, and then that mask was done. You had to get duct tape.
Hit you in the ear.
Yeah, you didn't want to wear it anyway because you couldn't breathe.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was really fascinating that these guys just pointed out to us was that, it is unfair to suggest that there was not popular lines of toys before Star Wars, right? Because there were superheroes and there was also Planet of the Apes, right? The Planet of the Apes had a pretty successful toy run. So the idea of making movies for toys was not a new thing by the time Star Wars came out. But I think you would agree that you can kind of split the merchandising history into pre-Star Wars and post-Star Wars, right? And the merchandising for Star Wars took movie merch tie-ins to a whole different level. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, but you're saying two things that are both correct. That yes, it took it to a whole new level, but the misconception that people have is that Star Wars started it all. A lot of people unduly credit Star Wars for sort of inventing these merchandising bonanzas and these blockbusters of toys and T-shirts and video games and all this stuff. Merchandising was around for a lot longer than George Lucas doing his stuff. They just happened to take it to a much higher level. But I'm glad you said that, because it's maddening. When I do research for articles, I find our journalists through the decades make that mistake and say, "Oh, it all started with Star Wars." It's like, no, man, Planet of the Apes came before that, and Ape Mania was a legit bonanza in 1974. So 3 years before Star Wars existed.
Yeah. Was the Planet of the Apes, was it as large scale as Star Wars, right? I mean, it's like you probably had action figures, the Mego dolls, but did you have bed sheets and pajamas and belt buckles and shirts and all that stuff? Okay, really?
Yes. Literally belt buckles. The Lee company did make belt buckles. And yes, there were T-shirts. Chain made Planet of the Apes garbage cans, like metal garbage cans that kids had. No, Ape Mania was humongous, and relatively speaking, because it was a different time then, yes, I would say that it was comparatively equivalent. It's like adjusting for inflation. Everything got a little crazier by 77. So a few years earlier, things were a little more simplistic. So there weren't maybe all of those opportunities, but pretty much anything you can think of that they did for that first wave of Star Wars toys, they had already done. And it's the same production. It's the same studio. It's 20th Century Fox. So Star Wars wasn't their first rodeo. They had already made a ton of money on Planet of the Apes.
I was just going to say, I'm fighting the urge to say that people went apeshit for it. for the Planet of the Apes merch. Yeah.
No, they did. You hear these stories about Star Wars, and they're fun because they're cool vignettes. Like when it broke, and it took a couple weeks for it to really break. So like I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We didn't get Star Wars until June. So it came out a month later than when it opened. It only opened on 32 screens, right? It was not a big opening because once again, people didn't expect this thing to do what it did. So there's vignettes of college kids doing side hustle cash by going and standing in line for families that didn't feel like waiting in line for the next Star Wars show. Well, that stuff was actually happening with Planet of the Apes too, because 20th Century Fox did a huge Go Ape for a Day campaign with the final movie that came out in 73. And they did movie marathons where movie theaters would all day long show all 5 movies. San Francisco was the first, I think it was the Coronet in San Francisco was the first theater to do that. 2,000 people showed up. The line was around the block to go see a movie marathon of Planet of the Apes. So it's all the same, maybe on a smaller scale, but it's all the same stuff. It's like this stuff has been around before Lucas changed the game or improved the game.
Yeah. I would say he industrialized the game. Whatever, they found the potential for that thing and it sort of popped off.
It's like a conveyor belt now, in a good way and a bad way, but it's very much like a conveyor belt. Yeah.
Well, there's also got to be a qualitative statement in there, right? There's something about Star Wars that resonates, and it resonates in perpetuity. Planet of the Apes resonated, but it was a flash in the pan. And it was gone for a long time. I mean, it's back in our world now with reboots that people are really digging. But I mean, those first 5 movies came out and it culminated in 1974, and Christmas 1974 was all about Planet of the Apes. If you were a kid, it was all about apes. You'd get your Mattel Tommy machine gun and the Planet of the Apes rubber mask, and it was a big deal. But then it was
pretend to be Charlton Heston.
Damn dirty apes!
Your hands off of me. That's a terrible Charlton Heston.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, it would be fairly not great. Not your best work. Yeah.
So one thing you talked about in the world's greatest toy digest, forgive me, I forgot the name for a second, was Kenner doing this early bird special that they did. I guess was it one of the original lines, or can you tell me what you found out in your research about how that came to be and what everybody's reaction to that was?
Yeah, the early bird certificate package. Mm-hmm. It's a funny story because Lucas was very afraid of people and companies stealing his ideas and stealing his intellectual property. So he did not allow his team or 20th Century Fox. There was a lawyer for 20th Century Fox named Mark Pevers, and there was Charles Lippincott who's his vice president of Lucasfilm. He didn't even allow them to go talk to toy companies and potential licensors until just a few months before the movie came out. And they actually sent out 200 letters to the top 200 toy companies. I remember being kind of blown away by that number. I was surprised that there were 200 toy companies in America in 1977. Turns out there were actually 1,000 toy companies at the time. There were 1,000 successful toy companies, and they all were ranked by sales volume. Kenner wasn't even in the top 4 or 5 at that point, but they sent out 200 letters, and they got either crickets or flat nose from 199 companies. And that's an important thing to understand, that nobody saw this coming. Everyone looked at, I mean, there's some funny quotes from Ideal, the toy company, where they're like, this has been done before. Star Wars is bland. It's boring. Like there's nothing here. Yeah. Kenner wisely jumped on it, but they didn't ink that deal until April. And the movie came out in May, and it obviously blew up, and Death Stars started exploding, and so did kids' minds, right? It was ubiquitous.
And 199 toy executives lost their jobs in May.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Right? You got to think that there was a lot of fallout from people
There's some executive that wakes up every day and is like, why didn't I do the Star Wars thing?
Why didn't I know? Yeah. I mean, I did do some research on the Mego thing, because most people at the time would have expected Mego to do that license. And it seems to have come down to the fact that they were doing the Micronauts toy line, which they felt was just hewed a little too close to the Star Wars universe. You got little robots and space creatures, and they thought, let's just focus on what we're already doing with Micronauts, and ended up being obviously a huge mistake. So 199 companies said no, and Kenner said yes, and so they didn't have any time. It takes 12 to 18 months to develop a toy line and get it manufactured in Hong Kong and distributed into American stores. So they had no chance. So what they did is they came up with the early bird certificate package, which was a cardboard envelope that had a little cardboard backer display that showed the characters. And you got a mail-in certificate where you could get the first 4 figures as soon as they would be available. The toys did not come out until early spring of 1978. The movie came out in May of 77, but we didn't get toys for almost a year. And that's hard when you're a kid. I remember waiting for this and trying to figure out what are these going to look like. I couldn't wait to see what they looked like. I was not thrilled when they came out, but I was excited.
Yeah.
So you actually bought one of these early bird certificates?
Yeah, I couldn't remember if specifically having it, but I was talking to my oldest brother, who's 3 years older than me, and we were talking about Star Wars, and he brought it up. He said, "Yeah, you had that package thing," and I was like, "Really? Are you sure?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I totally remember. You got that for Christmas in '77." I was like, I was assuming I must have gotten it, but I couldn't remember. And he said, "Oh yeah, I remember specifically thinking, what a shitty present."
Yeah. I mean, because again, to be 100% clear, what you bought when you went to the toy store was you paid money and you walked out with a sheet of cardboard that had pictures of toys you were going to get later when you mailed in this thing. That is what you got when you walked away. So there were kids on Christmas morning that opened up a sheet of cardboard and then a piece of paper that said you're going to get some stuff in the mail in 2 months, right? In February of the next year. I mean, that's amazing. But again, I think as we touched on earlier, it just goes to the enduring power of Star Wars that I mean, you couldn't have done that with Planet of the Apes because you said it was a flash in the pan, and you're right. There was no other franchise that had the momentum that Star Wars did. But those toys, I mean, those original, is it the original 4 or is it the original 12? Is it, if you have those and they're still in the package or if you still have them in good shape, those are some of the most valuable collectibles, period, full stop. There's nothing else that is more valuable than those original 12 Kenner action figures.
Well, that's a broad statement you're making. I'm sure there are a ton of variants from later issued things, end of the line stuff, Power of the Force or droids. There's going to be variants, but yeah, by and large, the first 4 that came out are important. Where you got Luke and Chewbacca and Princess Leia and R2-D2. Those were the first 4 that they chose. I was interested to learn that, because I remember that those were weird choices of characters. That Han Solo wasn't one of the first. I remember thinking that's weird. Like I get Luke. That makes sense. R2-D2. I probably would have thought C-3PO. But anyway, Kenner arrived at that decision after doing multiple focus groups with kids. They were like, "What do you want to see?" And those were the 4. That I keep gesturing over here so I can.
Oh yeah, he's got a poster of all of them.
Yeah,
I have a poster of the first 12 on my wall just because they're amazing. So
yeah, nice. And again, that's the very same picture that you've got there. They're like each of the 4 is on the back of each of these issues of the digest. So there's very clear, high resolution photos that you can see what they look like. But I agree as well. R2-D2 would not even be on my top 8 of like characters. You'd want the people, right? Like Han, Luke, Leia, and Darth Vader. That would be the first 4 you would imagine that they would do, right?
I'm also surprised that the Sand Person is there out of the whole series.
That he's there at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Tusken Raider, Sand Person.
Raider, forgive me.
Interesting. Still, Sand Person's right. They use that those names interchangeably. Yeah, no, I'm assuming that kids who made that decision, I'm going to say I understand it because I remember being so excited to find out what material they were going to use to make Chewbacca. I assumed, understandably, that it was going to be fur. I thought you would get, because I grew up on Mego, where they had very tactile, experiential materials that they use, polyesters and rubbers and hard plastics, and you got accessories. I thought the Star Wars toys were going to come out and be like the Mego toys that came before them, and they'd have stuff going on. With Mego, I remember being excited about the Human Torch. When I learned they were doing the Fantastic Four, I was like, how are they going to do fire? Like, what's fire on an action figure going to look like? Because it's never been done before. Yeah. And it was just a screen printed polyester bodysuit. I would say it's charmingly goofy, but it's pretty awful. And I would say the same thing about the Kenner Chewbacca. It's when that little statue came and I'm looking at this thing, I just remember the profound disappointment of like, you kidding me? Because I'm used to a toy that's twice as big with removable clothing, with accessories, with kind of clever, interesting treatments of materials, like the way they would try to show different things, metals and cloth. And these were just injection molded plastic that was painted. I was like, this is not good.
Yeah, and they barely move. They have like arm and legs, and that's pretty much it. Yep. They just kind of move up and down. Yeah, that's Well, again, not to talk turkey, but like, I mean, if you were to attempt to buy a set of the original 12 figures, like from the early bird special and those whole things, maybe not necessarily in package, but if you were trying to go for like just loose figures and just build the collection, and then maybe like, what would you be looking at spending if you were trying to get them all like 12 in the original packaging or whatever, just so that people have an idea of how truly collectible these things are.
Yeah, you're looking at a lot of money when you're asking for the packaging. You can find the figures loose with the accessories that they did come with, lightsabers, guns, whatnot. You can find those for relatively cheap, under $100 per figure. But the moment you get into packaging, you quickly get to 4 figures on almost everything. It's kind of crazy. And I don't understand it, because they made these toys in the millions and millions of toys. There was no shortage of these. So it kind of amazes me that today some of them are considered scarce. And I guess it's not even that they're scarce. I think it's just a supply and demand issue. There are so many Star Wars fans that it just didn't matter how many they made. There's enough people out there willing to throw a couple $100 to experience opening up a Han Solo again.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have, not to put you on the spot, but do you have all 12 figures? Like, do you have a complete collection now?
I sold them all. Unfortunately, I don't have them anymore. I actually sold my entire childhood toy collection when I lived in Boston, and I regret it deeply to this day. You know what? I consider myself now a journalist, not a collector. I like doing the research, doing the deep dive on the stories behind the stories of these toys. That's why the quarterly magazine that I'm publishing, World's Greatest Toys Digest, it's going to take any given topic. I'm just going to go as deep as I can. I'm going to try to find material that has not been published before, sides of the story that haven't been told before. And that stuff is very interesting to me. So I don't feel the need like I once did to collect them all, as we say. Collect them all is a nice phrase.
What was it like self-publishing? Or I guess you had some assistance, but you created this thing from scratch. How many pages did it start out at? And what did you... What was the metric you used to decide what goes in here and what doesn't go in here?
Well, I didn't self-publish the book. The book was actually published by Tomorrow's in North Carolina. They're a respected publisher. The magazines that I do now, I self-publish those. I get those printed, handle all the distribution on that stuff. For me, I had some deal breaker expectations on this book. It had to be a big, oversized, full color hardcover. It just had to be. I didn't want a soft cover book. I didn't want an 8.5 by 11 book or a digest size book. I wanted it to be a coffee table book. That was huge. And so when I went out and talked to a couple of publishers who were expressing some interest in it, I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna die on this hill. It's got to be full color. It's got to be. I got to have at least 250 pages. I think it ended up being 264. I could have made it twice as long, but I obviously had to edit it down to something reasonable. But yeah, that was the goal, was to make it a big, beautiful collection that you can put on your table and you don't have to spend $100,000 getting every piece.
It's cool because it's very clear to us that your passion for collecting has just shifted in terms of you being an editor, and now you're collecting facts and you're collecting information, which, I mean, the zines that we've read, and I mean that as an absolute compliment. I don't know if people still call them zines anymore, like independently published zines.
You make it sound cooler than it is. I like that.
Zines. Look, dude, everybody loves fanzines because fanzines were always the stuff that it was like for us, by us. You didn't want the corporate... I didn't want the corporate overlords telling me what bands I should listen to, but the fanzines that you had to pay for in the mail, those were the real deal of people. These are the cool bands you wanted to listen to. But back to just the editing thing. I mean, do you have to kind of turn it off at a certain point, right? Do you have to go, okay, I physically cannot talk to everybody who worked on Mego or on these Star Wars stories. I have enough. I can proverbially close the book on this issue or, the next thing that you're working on. Is that a struggle for you?
Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. I go down wormholes constantly. I mean, the next issue I'm working on has nothing to do with the toys that we've already discussed. I'm doing an issue on cereal premiums.
Nice.
So in the 70s, you got sugar cereal. You would reach down into the cereal and you would pull out that little toy, that little tchotchke that was in there. Cereal premiums is the history of those things going back over 100 years. I don't know if people realize how deep that industry goes, other than people who are serious collectors of that stuff. So that's currently the rabbit hole I've gone down is, who made these premiums? Where did they come from? Like the Lone Ranger radio show ended up doing this, and then Quaker Oats did that, and then, I mean, did you know that Willy Wonka, the original movie with Gene Wilder, did you guys know that was financed by Quaker Oats?
No.
No, I did not know that they were in the movie game. Yeah.
And I didn't see one bowl of cereal in that movie.
Well, and that's actually a very conscious decision. I have great quotes from them saying, like, we are not going to do that. We have other mechanisms to monetize this, but that was considered a lowbrow thing to do even back then in 1971 to do product placement. Somehow that, with everything in society, that went out the window, and now nobody cares. They do it all the time. But back then, it was considered a big no-no to just, here's your cereal and Willy Wonka candy. And yeah, they didn't do that.
That's amazing, because when I absolutely think of Willy Wonka, I think of like colorful, delicious chocolate, and to find out that it's brought to you by the most bland, boring cereal breakfast product, that's an amazing kind of combination for sure. Well, let me ask you a question, because you obviously, throughout tons of your extensive research, have talked to a lot of collectors, right, about various things. Have you been able to isolate, do you think that there is a commonality to collectors? Is it a personality trait? Is it perhaps an era that people grew up in, right? You mentioned a lot of Gen X kids growing up in the 70s. Is there something that you've kind of noticed is common amongst people who collect things, whatever they collect, but they're just collectors?
Yeah, I mean, again, just the simple answer of nostalgia is true, but I think there's more to it. I think there's a child psychology there. Speaking personally, I spent a lot of time playing alone. I had two older brothers, but they were 2 and 3 years older than me. So they sort of grew up together, and then I was not alone. They were there, but I did spend a lot of time sort of playing on my own. And I grew up like a lot of kids in the 70s. Like, I love the slogan, Gen X, raised on hose water and neglect. It's a great slogan, because there's something true there, right? I grew up in a neighborhood where it was all latchkey kids and broken homes. It's what it was. And so you had to be clever. You were left to your own devices. I had a rawhide string around my neck that had my house key. I literally was a latchkey kid. That was the way I got into my house after school, because I walked home alone. And I walked home to a room full of amazing action figures and toys, and I loved those. And obviously then you discover whatever it is of the time. For me, it was girls and BMX. And suddenly toys weren't interesting anymore.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. But then a few years pass, and you're in high school or college, and you start to get a little disposable income, because now you've got a job. And now you're thinking, you know what, man? I really freaking loved He-Man. He-Man was just like, he was so cool to me. I'm going to go see if I can get one of those. Now it's really easy, because you got eBay, right? You can jump online and you can find just about anything, even if it's super rare. You can find this stuff. But I think that's what it is. I think the collector it is nostalgia, but the personality trait that you're looking for, I think, is someone who possibly an unnatural amount of importance on the toys themselves. They became so important as a play partner, as a babysitter. And I think that's something that feels good when you think about those childhood comforts. I mean, we all lean back on nostalgia is big for everybody, but I think toy collectors, there's something about how important those toys were to them as kids. That's what they're trying to recapture, I think.
Well, I mean, it sounds like this was something that these kids were you as an individual, and I did the same thing. Like, this is how you use these toys to develop sort of an identity and these concepts of yourself, like, modeling interactions and storytelling, all that stuff that shapes who you are. So I guarantee people are seeing these things, and they're not seeing a toy, they're seeing a little piece of themselves. So I'm sure that's what people are always chasing and going after as well.
Yeah, and I think people who are not toy collectors are just better adjusted. Those of us who do, we're just trying to work issues out. We're still trying to work issues out. And we're hearkening back to simpler days, and things weren't complicated. And it doesn't matter what era you grow up in. If you're a millennial or a zennial or a Gen X, you had your good guys and your black hats and your white hats, and it doesn't matter what it is, Ninja Turtles or Batman, whatever era you're in. You're going to still have those kids who need that babysitter.
Fixing our issues 1 8-inch figure at a time, right?
Totally.
And do you think collecting and the concept of collecting is going to continue into the future for generations, or do you see it shifting? You mentioned earlier about things moving much more into the digital space.
Yeah, it's interesting. Doing the cereal issue, I've been spending a lot of time in grocery store cereal aisles, just what's going on now? You know what? I know what happened then, but where are we now? And it's premiums as they were then, little tchotchkes inside impact toys. That's not really a thing anymore. Now it's that now you got QR codes that link you to a website that you can download a virtual Minecraft item and put it into your video game. So yes, the answer to your question is both. Yes, collecting will continue, but it will completely evolve. I don't think we're too far from action figures and that type of collecting kind of going the way of the buggy whip, because it's just not how kids today are interacting. And we could get into a whole arena on that, because for me, I blame movies and television for that, because growing up in the 70s, the entertainment that we had was very accessible. It was friendly. It wasn't terrifying. You know, the Batman that we knew was even the Tim Burton, which was a little bit scary, but it was still very friendly. And it wasn't, you get to Batman Returns and then you get to the Christopher Nolan stuff. We're just going down this hellscape to entertainment. And I, as a father, I cannot show my own son Marvel movies, DC movies, can't show him Batman movies. I mean, now he's probably old enough now, but I mean, it's this, all the years he's growing up, I'm like, boy, I sure wish I could take you to see the Batman movie. But we have taken that, we've claimed it, and we've stolen it from future generations. And that breaks my heart. Just, I think that Batman should belong to children. And if you're an adult who chooses to partake, good for you. But we have co-opted the entire property and tried to make Scarecrow and Bane as terrifying and as horror genre based as we possibly can. And who gets left out there? It's kids.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. It's something I didn't really think of, that perhaps maybe that's why some collecting stuff is phasing out, because there's just less options for kids. They're just less kid friendly, right?
They're not reaching kids anymore. So kids are going to things like Minecraft, and they're going to Roblox, and they're going to online environments that they have scary elements. I mean, there are creepers and things that are in Minecraft that they're scary, but they're like Gene Simmons scary, right? Gene Simmons spitting blood and shooting fire. That was scary in the late 70s, but it was exciting scary. It's possible to do it. Tim Burton did it in '89. He made something that was it was a little edgy, was a little intense, but it was accessible to all ages. Batman the Animated Series, when Warner Brothers came out with Batman the Animated Series in September 1992, man, that is, go watch that cartoon. If you've never seen Batman the Animated Series, it's brilliant.
We've absolutely watched every single one of them multiple times.
Multiple times. And actually, you'd be curious to know, we actually, our most recent guest on an episode that's coming out soon was Joe R. Lansdale, who wrote 3 episodes of Batman the Animated Series.
I know the name. Oh my God. Well, I'll be doing a future issue on Kenner's Batman the Animated Series line, because I bought all of those as they came out. I mean, the one that got away was the Robin Dragster in '93. Kenner came out with, they repurposed a toy that they hadn't done for the Batman movies. And it was like a little 4x4, like a dune buggy kind of thing. But it was a Robin Dragster. Yeah. And I remember it came out in '93, and I was living in Michigan at the time, preparing to move to Boston after college. And I remember going to this store called Myers Thrifty Acres, like a big kind of Walmart store. And I saw the Robin Dragster. I was buying everything as it came out. And I was like, you know what? Just about to move. I don't need to schlep another toy. I'm going to wait, and I'll pick this up in Boston when I get there. I make the move. I start hitting the toy stores. I can't find this thing anywhere. I eventually call the We Care line. Like Kenner used to have this We Care line. It was an 800 number. You could call them about anything, and they were really great. I lost a part to this toy, they would send you another part. They were a really wonderful company. So I called them up and like, all right, I can't find the Robin Dragster anywhere. What's going on? And I remember her telling me this, and I thought it was fake for a while, but she said there was a fire at the factory. And I was like, oh, really? That's what your answer is? Like, there's a fire at the factory?
Come on.
But if you look it up, the worst factory fire in history was at the Kenner Cater factory in '93 in Thailand. Wow. And hundreds of people died. in that fire.
Yeah.
It was a real thing, and all of the tools and the molds and a lot of the inventory that was staged and ready to go into the distribution pipeline burned, literally burned. So that's probably the most collectible vehicle from the Batman the Animated Series line. If you're a Kenner head.
Is the Robin Dragster your kind of white whale? Like what? Like do you have a white whale now? Of like
I have it loose and I have it mint in box because I had to have it. I mean, at that point, it didn't matter. I ended up spending probably $300 on it to get it in the box, but it didn't matter. It was like, I have to own this thing.
Yeah.
But that's one of those toys that is going to be rare and scarce. They didn't make a lot of them because they burned, and they're hard to find now because the people who have them aren't selling them.
Right.
So that's a tough piece to find.
So what is your white whale? What's the one toy that you don't have that you're like one day, or the one collectible you're like, I'm going to get this in my collection?
In all the world of toys,
in any franchise, any IP, just like your white whale collectible.
A genie shows up and goes, "What do you want?"
A genie shows up and says, "What do you want?" God, that's a great question.
You can't wish for more wishes.
Yeah.
I would probably get this toy they did in 1978. It was Aquaman versus the Great White Shark.
Nice.
It was an 8-inch Aquaman figure. I, as a Super Friends 70s Gen X kid, I loved Super Friends. I would have my Mego superhero dolls on Saturday morning. I would watch that show, and it was like, they were not related technically, but to a kid,
they're the same thing.
There's my guys. Yeah, it's the same thing. And I didn't even know this existed when I was a kid. I found out as an adult, and I'm like, I would love to have that. But it was a little battery operated shark that you could put Aquaman's hand on the fin and then swim in the bathtub with this thing. And as an 8-year-old, I probably would have loved that thing. And as a 50-year-old, I would really love to have that thing because it's fantastic. But, I don't know if I want to throw $5,000 at it, which is probably what it would take.
Yeah. How many baths are you taking now, right? Not as many when you were 8.
Not enough. But yeah, I love Aquaman, and I love kooky toys like that, but not $5,000 worth.
Yeah, I hear you.
Becomes a museum piece. So as we start to wrap up here, like what's coming up next for you in the digest, the magazines? Obviously, sounds like you have some interest in telling the story about the manufacturing process of a lot of these Mego toys. But what's your plans for the future?
Is the serial thing going to be? Is the serial thing going to be a multi-part?
I'm going to try to get it all out in one issue. It's going to have to be a oversized issue, I think, if I do that, because there's just so much wonderful content. I mean, there's so many amazing premiums and programs that happened through the decades. I'll do serial premiums, then I'll do Planet of the Apes, and then I don't know exactly where I'm going to go from there. Probably Batman the Animated Series because I love that line.
Yeah, as do we. So, well, I mean, the digest is awesome. I can't stress enough that you should be reading it. But, I mean, as we mentioned before, the Mego book is on Amazon, so you can still get some copies there. But if you're listening and you definitely want to subscribe to this digest, because why wouldn't you? But where can people how can they reach out to you to get copies of this, right? Because they got to go through you.
They do. I mean, it's on eBay. So if you just jump on eBay and type in World's Greatest Toys Digest, you're going to find all the issues that are there. A couple of them are sold out, but most of the issues are on there and available. You can email me, benjamin@worldsgreatesttoys.com, but I would say just probably check it out on eBay if it's something you want to geek out on.
You should. It's incredibly thoroughly, exhaustively researched, and you're bringing joy, dude. Because a lot of these people who can't maybe afford to collect these toys, or frankly, who have just forgotten about some of these toys from their childhood, they'll flip through the pages and go, "Oh my God, I remember that I had this. I forgot about this." And so for you to be able to bring that joy back to people's lives, it's super cool that you get to do that, man. Yeah. So thank you for the hard work.
Well, thank you, and that is exactly it. That moment of rediscovery is a powerful thing. It is something that leads people into collecting as adults when they're like, "Oh, I forgot about that." And there's some weird nerve ending in our soul that a toy that meant something to you as a kid, when you see it as an adult and you haven't thought about it in 30 years, it touches something that it's hard to describe. But the result is that you often say, "I think I need to own that."
Well, I think every toy executive in America owes you a thank you at this point for trying to reinvigorate the industry for everybody and continue making people collectors of physical things. But thank you so much for joining us today. It was really, really wonderful chat. We had a great time talking with you. obviously tons and tons of stuff to learn about all your things. So I just want to say I appreciate that. And thank you for all your hard work.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Are you active on social media? Is there a place that we can send, other than just your email, is there a place we can send people to keep up with the cool stuff you're doing? Or
I do, I'm trying to decide if I want to make that dive into Facebook and YouTube and all that stuff. Social media is a dark chasm, and I don't do very well on it. It's hard. I get disappointed in people online, and so I struggle with social media. But I've thought about doing that. I am on Instagram. I am Mego Toy Talk with little underscores between. So MEGO is the company, and then Mego Toy Talk. So I'm very active on Instagram. I'm thinking about doing Facebook. Thinking about doing some YouTube videos to try to drum up some interest. I'm obsessed with documentaries. Documentary films is. I live for Netflix documentaries. On any topic, if it's well done. Watching the Tour de France documentary, the Unchained on Netflix. Oh, I love that stuff. So I'm thinking about doing what I consider my magazines is little documentaries. I try with each issue, I'm trying to take a theme, but also thread this narrative. So I want to take you on a journey of this culture, whatever it is, whether it's Star Wars or Planet of the Apes or sugar cereal and Saturday morning cartoons. I want to take you on that journey of nostalgic rediscovery. So yeah, I probably need to get on social media and start doing YouTube videos to get people more aware. But now I've done a podcast, so look at me.
There you go. We're certainly appreciative to have you on the podcast today. We will try and push people to your Instagram now that we know about it. They can certainly email you as well. But today's journey looks like it's starting to wrap up, as we do have 3 empty glasses here. We've somehow drank 2 cups of coffee here.
The caffeine crash is setting in.
It's coming in.
I'm shaking here. So we
want to say thank you, Benjamin, for joining us today. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And hopefully you're now digging through your closets, trying to find a toy you remembered you have that might be worth a few $1,000s. But if you want to keep,
and then find me on Instagram and tell me all about it.
Yes, tell Benjamin. And then if you want to keep up with us, you can find us on Instagram at 2drinkmaximum, TWODRINKMAXIMUM. Getting better at it every time I have to say it.
Yeah, he did it. Well, he's gotten it this time. Good.
I rehearse quietly at home whenever nobody's looking. But thank you so much for joining us, Benjamin. This has been an excellent episode. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Muse Rooms, wonderful co-working space there in Hollywood. Be sure and check them out at themuserooms.com. That's MUSE for Muse. And thank you, everyone, for listening today.
Cheers.
Cheers.